Part 1. Arrival at Station Elen Prime. 1100 words, the shining lights of Station Elen Prime. The most advanced medical research facility in the galaxy, glowed like a star in the void. Dozens of species from across the Galactic Council gathered, here some to learn, others to observe, and the elite few to teach. This was where the most prestigious alien doctors came to study biology, genetics, and the limits of living organisms. For the first time in galactic history, humans had been granted access to the station. It had taken them 20 years of diplomatic effort, hundreds of scientific papers, and dozens of peace treaties just to be allowed in. Even now, their role was minimal. They were merely observers, permitted to visit, not to lead, but none. Of that bothered Dr. Eliza Grant, humanity's top xenobiologist. She stepped off the shuttle with her head high, a confident grin on her face, and a portable scanner strapped to her side. She was tall, athletic, and carried herself like someone who'd fought to be taken seriously and had finally won. Standing across the docking bay was Dr. Varnick, chief physician of the Earthlings Medical Council. A towering figure with pale blue scales and sharp red eyes. Varnock was considered one of the most brilliant medical minds in the galaxy, and one of its most arrogant. He eyed the humans with open disdain. He didn't bother to hide his smirk. "So these are the Terrans," he muttered in his native tongue, loud enough for his staff to hear. "Soft-skinned, no armor, no redundant organs. It's a miracle their species lasted this long." Dr. Elisa caught the tone, even if she didn't understand the words. She just smiled. Varnock stepped forward, extending one of his 4 thin arms in a formal gesture of greeting. "On behalf of the Earthlings Council, welcome to Station Elen Prime," he said. "We are honored by your interest in advanced biology." The pause before interest wasn't missed. "Thank you," Eliza replied cheerfully. "We're excited to compare notes." Her voice was polite but confident. She knew what was coming, as part of the station's standard biosecurity procedure. All visitors had to undergo a biological screening. It was framed as a safety measure to ensure no pathogens or dangerous traits entered the shared research labs, but Varnock had pushed for it specifically to see what human biology looked like. "Up close, we'll need full scans," he said. "Tissue samples, neural maps, muscular analysis, and of course your DNA." "Of course," Eliza replied, stepping forward and offering her arm before the Earthlings technician even asked. "We're not afraid of science." Privately, Varnock was amused. He fully expected their results to confirm what he already believed: that human biology was primitive, underdeveloped, and barely functional by galactic standards. He had studied hundreds of species, aquatic beings with 3 hearts, insectoids with self-repairing exoskeletons, even silicon-based life forms immune to heat and pressure. By comparison, humans were slow, vulnerable, and built for low-performance environments. They didn't even have natural armor. The tests began. Blood samples were drawn, neural scans were run, muscle fibers were examined under high-magnification imaging, heart and lung function were tracked. The process was clinical and efficient. By the end of the first day, Varnock had reviewed the baseline data. As expected, confirmed his assumptions on the surface. He gathered a small group of alien researchers in the lab and displayed a human organ diagram on the holoboard. With a wave of his clawed hand, he highlighted the circulatory system. "Only 1 heart," he said, as if announcing a joke. "Circulates oxygen through a single loop system. Inefficient. Primitive. Most high-performance species use dual chambers. Parallel redundancy. Humans just don't." He moved on to the lungs. "Their respiratory system relies entirely on diaphragm pressure and air intake. No gill system. No external filters. No backup. 1 lung puncture, and they're half dead. Honestly, I'd expect more from a mid-tier predator." His audience chuckled. "They can't even regenerate lost limbs," he continued. "No redundancy in appendages. Limited neuroplasticity, and they store fat in soft tissue. Like walking biological balloons." Everyone in the room laughed. 2 more polite ones. To Varnock, it was all proof. The humans had arrived at the station pretending to be equals, but their bodies betrayed the truth. They were biological antiques. the galactic equivalent of stone tools in a plasma age. But Dr. Eliza Grant wasn't concerned. She was fully aware that first-glance analysis would look unimpressive. Humans had spent centuries thinking the same thing about themselves, right? Till they started comparing themselves to others, and that's where it always got interesting. Eliza sat patiently. In the waiting chamber, while her results were compiled by the station's AI, she watched technicians carry samples back and forth. She could hear the faint hum of machinery behind the walls. She noticed the smug glances from passing researchers and didn't respond. Instead, she just sat there, calm and still, tapping her fingers on the console in a quiet rhythm. She knew what was coming next, because basic scans only told half the story. The rest of the real story came when you looked deeper, and that's exactly what the station's automated systems were doing now. After the initial surface-level results were processed, the advanced diagnostics had kicked in, running higher-resolution scans of human DNA, deep tissue samples, and cellular behavior under stress. That's when things would start to look strange, and Dr. Varnock, still laughing over the data, had no idea what was coming. Part 2. The first red flag, 1100 words. It began with a blinking red light on Dr. Varnock's analysis console. He was in the middle of reviewing another report about Yelkari regenerative tissue when the warning appeared. Anomaly detected. Human DNA sample. Sample ID number 332. Recommend manual review. Varnock frowned. He tapped the console, expecting a minor error, maybe a contamination warning or a sensor miscalibration. After all, humans were new to Elon Prime's systems. Perhaps the scanners weren't calibrated properly for carbon-based bipeds with such odd protein markers. But as the first genetic breakdown appeared on screen, Varnock leaned forward and frowned deeper. This wasn't a system error. The data had been reviewed 5 times by the automated processors, and each time the results were the same. Human DNA was strange, not just different trong, by the standards of galactic biology, was full of things that shouldn't exist, outside of genetically engineered war species. First, there was mitochondrial resilience. The human cells kept producing energy under oxygen-deprived conditions longer than expected. That wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. Varnock had seen war clones with similar traits, but they burned out in days. Human cells just kept going. Then came the telomeric structures, the little caps at the ends of chromosomes that regulated aging. In most species, they decayed over time, but in humans, they rebuilt themselves after exposure to stress. That alone set off alarms, but it didn't stop there. There was immune system redundancy, which meant humans didn't just have one defense against infection, they had multiple overlapping systems that responded in waves. Some species had evolved to resist one type of pathogen. Humans evolved to resist everything all at once, adapting as the threat changed. And then came the most disturbing find. A gene cluster one not previously cataloged linked directly to pain tolerance. Under normal conditions, this cluster was dormant. But when the body experienced physical trauma, the gene activated. Instead of suppressing pain like most species did under stress, human biology increased its resistance to pain not through suppression, but through neurological rerouting. This isn't right, Varnock muttered to himself. Pain tolerance should decrease under repeated exposure, not increase. This is backwards. He summoned his assistant, a younger Eurethi researcher named Calrex. Double-check the neural scan from sample. #332, Varnock ordered, and rerun the DNA sequencing on all 5 subjects. This must be a calibration fault. Calrex nodded and went to work. Over the next few hours, all 5 human samples were reprocessed, this time manually, with oversight from 2 additional researchers. They cleaned the equipment, ran control tests, cross-referenced with station medical archives. When the results came back, they were identical. Varnock's mood changed from annoyed to alarmed. "These are not abnormalities, Calrex," said, voice tight. "This is baseline human biology." Varnock didn't respond right away. His eyes were fixed on the display now, zooming in on a cluster of genes that, based on galactic science, should only exist in species that had undergone deliberate bioengineering. Sir, Calrex continued, this section here, it mimics stress-induced mutation patterns, but they're controlled, adaptive. It's like their cells are reprogramming themselves on the fly, Varnak whispered. Not mutation, improvisation. Ash. Just then, the lab doors slid open, and Dr. Eliza Grant stepped in. She saw the cluster of alien researchers hovering over a display and gave them a polite smile. Everything okay in here? Varnak straightened, trying to reassert control. We're reviewing your data, he said, his voice tight. Find anything interesting? Eliza asked innocently. You don't have pain suppressors, he accused. Your pain receptors get stronger under trauma. Eliza raised an eyebrow. We call it grit, Varnak snapped. That's not grit, that's biological madness. Your systems are constantly adjusting under damage. It's unstable. Elisa walked closer to the display. No, it's adaptive. You're thinking like someone who evolved in stable conditions. We didn't. Our biology comes from chaos. Earth isn't a gentle place. The conversation turned tense. Varnak pointed toward the screen. This isn't just about chaos. This level of adaptation, pain tolerance, immune layer redundancy, cellular restructuring, it's not typical of a naturally evolved species. It's engineered. Eliza folded her arms. We're not engineered, Doctor. We just never stopped evolving. Our planet forces you to grow tougher or die. He stared at her, trying to decide whether she was being honest or cleverly deceptive. The data didn't lie, though. Human biology was active, responsive, and evolving, even under analysis. Calrex glanced at another panel. Sir, muscle density? Reports just finalized. Varnak moved quickly to view them. Human muscle tissue, it turned out, wasn't denser than other species. It was layered. Muscle fibers could adapt, multiply, even rebuild themselves stronger after stress. More alarming was the fact that the process didn't require special conditions. It was normal, sir. Calrex whispered. They're built to get stronger through damage. Varnak stared. Most species maintained their biological peak once they matured. Improvement after adulthood was rare. But humans, they grew stronger when broken. It was like nothing he had ever seen. Then came the neural reports. The final shock came. When the neural latency data was processed, human reflex speeds weren't particularly fast at first glance. But the closer the system looked, the stranger it became. Humans weren't just reacting quickly, they were reacting before events finished. Unfolding threat detection patterns in the brain didn't activate after a threat appeared. They triggered in anticipation of threat. This doesn't make sense, one technician said. It's like their brains are guessing what's going to happen, not guessing, Varnak corrected. Predicting. It's instinctive predictive. Modeling, Calrex added. That would explain their combat records. They respond to danger almost before it arrives. Varnak was silent. He was beginning to understand the truth. Something was deeply wrong with everything they thought for decades. The Galactic Council had believed humans were weak. Not because of malice, but because the data had always been surface level. Now the analysis was going deeper. They were uncovering a terrifying reality. Humans weren't weak at all. They were resilient, adaptive, built for pain. Designed by evolution, not artifice, to overcome obstacles through transformation. Most species needed stable environments. Humans thrived in unpredictable ones. Varnak closed the data display and looked up at Eliza, who still stood patiently nearby. You said your species came from chaos, he said slowly. You weren't exaggerating. Nope, Eliza said. With a slight grin, we had ice ages, volcanic winters, asteroid strikes, predators, and our own wars. Evolution didn't give us the best tools. It gave us the ability to change the tools we had. Varnak didn't laugh this time. He simply nodded and whispered, we need to run more tests. Part 3. The Simulation Incident. 1,100 words after the strange and unsettling test results from the human samples. Dr. Varnak could no longer dismiss humanity as primitive. What started as a mockery of human biology had turned into a growing list of biological anomalous things even advanced species didn't possess. Varnak now needed proof, not just lab results, but practical, observable behavior, and so he proposed a field test, a controlled survival simulation. Designed to test a species' reaction to high-stress combat and environmental threats, it was a standard part of research on Station Alien Prime. The simulation chamber, a massive dome filled with ever-changing holographic terrain, was used to evaluate elite soldiers and high-functioning survival species from across the galaxy. Varnak had seen apex predators last 10, maybe 15 minutes. The average duration for non-military species was about 6 minutes. Anything beyond 20 was considered military-grade biology. "Let's see how your bodies perform under pressure," Varnak said to the humans. "Unless you'd rather skip the test." Dr. Eliza Grant smiled politely. "We faced worse than simulations, Doctor. We'll participate." The first human to enter the simulation was Corporal James Weller, a former Earth-based Special Forces operative. He wore no armor, just a light pressure suit adapted to the station's gravity and atmosphere. The aliens gathered in the observation deck, watching with interest and, in some cases, amusement. Surely, this fragile-looking human wouldn't last long. The simulation launched. The terrain inside the dome morphed into a shattered, mountainous wasteland. Temperature dropped to freezing. Acid rain poured. Blinding flashes of light mimicked solar flares. Mechanical drones flew overhead, scanning for movement, while spike-covered quadrupeds roamed the valleys below. The difficulty of the test increased. Every 60 seconds, at first, Weller moved cautiously. He studied the environment, collecting rocks and checking his surroundings. When the first drone swooped down, he didn't panic. Grabbed a broken piece of debris, smashed the drone midair, and used its metallic parts to build makeshift shin armor. The aliens began to murmur. Then came the predators, simulated. Beasts with rows of teeth and skin like plasma-forged armor. Weller ducked into cover, waited, and then baited them into attacking each other using the drone parts as distractions. He adapted, he improvised, he built traps, even mimicked animal calls to lure creatures away from resource caches. Every moment of the test, he improved, learning, adjusting, surviving. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. By the 46-minute mark, the simulation's AI began ramping up threats beyond normal levels. The chamber had never needed this many difficulty increases before. The AI issued a rare warning. Simulated environment is exceeding safety threshold. Subject remains active. Manual override. Varnak stared at the console, stunned. He shouldn't still be alive. One alien researcher whispered. "He's not just alive," Calrex added. "Thriving." Finally, Weller gave the end of simulation signal and walked out soaked in sweat, scratched and dirty, but smiling. "That was fun," he said casually. "Bit like my first deployment in Alaska, minus the wolves." The room went silent. Thought the test would break him. Instead, it had to keep up. Weller's performance shocked everyone on the station. The AI simulation had been forced to upgrade its own threat matrix just to try and kill him, and still failed. But it wasn't just about Weller's military training. The biological data gathered during the simulation was even more impressive than the test itself. Sensors embedded in the chamber tracked everything: heart rate, hormone levels, body temperature, neural activity. What they found was unbelievable. Its heart rate increased predictably, but never hit dangerous levels. It spiked under stress, then regulated itself almost like it had its own feedback control. Cortisol and adrenaline levels surged, but didn't create panic or erratic behavior. Instead, they improved focus and reaction time. His muscle fibers micro-tore under strain, but by the end of the test, there were signs of rapid early-stage regeneration beginning inside his own body. Not hours later, within minutes, his pain tolerance increased as the simulation progressed. Signals from the spinal cord began bypassing certain pain receptors entirely, routing instead to problem-solving regions of the brain. Even Varnak, once a proud critic of human biology, now stood frozen in disbelief. "They're built to adapt to adversity," he said slowly. no matter how extreme. Elisa explained what the data couldn't after Weller's exit. The council demanded an explanation. Surely, this wasn't normal. Was he a genetic freak? Some kind of enhanced super soldier? Liza stepped forward and clarified. Corporal Weller isn't. Enhanced, she said. He's not even in peak condition. He's 35, slightly iron deficient, and hasn't trained in 3 months due to an ankle sprain. You're joking, Varnock said, mouth slightly open. No, she said. That's just a standard human soldier. But what about the predictive responses? The way he anticipated threats before they appeared. That's a human trait, called situational awareness, she explained. Our brains are wired to track patterns and make snap decisions. We evolved under constant threat from weather, predators, rival tribes. Every sense we have is tuned to danger. She paused. Then added, our fear doesn't weaken us. It sharpens us. Most species shut down under fear. We speed up, a reptilian scientist murmured. You respond to danger by evolving mid-event. Exactly, Eliza replied. The council begins to understand that night. The alien scientists reviewed all the simulation footage and internal body metrics. They discovered that human muscles responded better after damage. That humans under physical and mental strain experienced neural rewiring, improving reaction time within minutes. That fear, pain, and pressure did not create shutdown, but instead triggered growth mechanisms. One alien doctor, reviewing the brain scans, said their biology was never meant to be efficient. It was meant to change. The realization was beginning to set in. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity was unfinished. It wasn't a completed species at its final form. It was a living blueprint. It's constantly rewriting itself based on hardship. Varnock's transformation dire. Varnock, who had once laughed at human biology, now stayed late into the night in his lab, reviewing the results again and again. He watched the footage of Weller's simulation 5 times, each time seeing something new. The way Weller paused to scan his surroundings before acting. The way he used terrain, tools, and timing to survive. It wasn't just training. It was instinct supported by biological evolution on a feedback loop. Varnock stood in front of the holodisplay, deep in thought. Pain doesn't slow them down, he murmured. Stress makes them smarter. Injury makes them stronger. Fear makes them faster. No wonder they survived a death world. He turned to Calrex. Prepare a new study proposal, he said. From this moment on, human biology is no longer classified as primitive. It is to be considered adaptive tier with reactive evolution capability. Calrex blinked. You're changing the classification? Varnock nodded. I'm submitting a formal request to begin joint research. We have much to learn. Part 4. Beyond the data, 1,100 words, the test was over. But its effects were just beginning to ripple across Station Aelin Prime and beyond. For decades, the Galactic Council had believed humanity to be, at best, an oddity. A developing species from a far-flung corner of the Orion Spur. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. That view had been based on appearances, outdated first contact files, perhaps most of all arrogance. But the simulation incident had changed. Everything, in less than an hour, a single human had shattered records, outperformed apex species, and triggered alarm bells in one of the most advanced AI-controlled testing systems in the galaxy. And it wasn't just his performance that shocked the observers, it was the biology behind it. The Council's top, medical researchers couldn't sleep. Dozens of scientists on the station, Urethi, Farnix, Lurikesh, even the coldly logical. Threx gathered to review the footage and data, the reports. Once filled with smug footnotes about inefficient anatomy and fragile construction, were now rewritten with urgency, adaptive musculature, triggered by microtrauma, reactive neuroplasticity, reshaping brain connections during stress, pain response, redirection, diverting signals from emotion centers to logic centers, multi-layered immunity, capable of evolving within the host to combat new pathogens. And then there was the psychological profile. Humans did not break under stress. They grew under it. The Emergency Summit Dr. Varnock, once the loudest critic of humanity, called for an emergency. summit with representatives from the Galactic Medical Authority and the Council's Threat Assessment Committee. It was held in Elan Prime's Great Hall-in Auditorium, usually reserved for announcements. It's about plagues or planetary crises. Now it was being used to talk about humans. Dozens of alien officials filed into their seats, looked curious. Others skeptical, a few were openly hostile. But all of them had seen the reports. Varnak stood at the center podium. For once, he didn't sound proud. He sounded awed. Colleagues, he began. I stand before you to retract my prior conclusions. Regarding Homo sapiens of Terra, I labeled them primitive. I called them biologically inefficient. He tapped a holographic button, and a series of charts, DNA sequences, and neural maps appeared in the air. I was wrong, murmurs spread through the crowd. Varnak continued, their biological systems do not follow traditional evolutionary logic. Their pain receptors grow duller under sustained injury. Their stress responses result not in breakdown, but in enhancement. Their very cells respond to trauma by altering structure and function. He zoomed in on the pain tolerance gene. This segment here only activates when the subject is in danger. It appears dormant until triggered by environmental stimuli. This is on-demand evolution. Another button press brought up footage from the simulation. Corporal Weller building armor from scrap, setting traps, adapting to terrain, and thriving in conditions meant to simulate a Class 10 disaster zone. This man, Varnak said, is not enhanced. He is not unique. He is average for a human. Gasps echoed through the chamber. A new classification up until now. Humans had been labeled as Class 4 biologicals, low threat. Medium function species with no significant adaptations beyond basic endurance. The Erethi used them for low-priority scientific exchanges. The Farniks considered them beneath consideration. The Kythel even mocked them in interstellar broadcasts. Now, that label was being rewritten. Varnak displayed a new proposed classification. Class 12 Adaptive Combatant, High Threat Potential. Some of the delegates protested. Alurakesh, represented a species with natural exoskeletal armor and built-in toxin glands, stood up. Surely you exaggerate. They are soft-skinned, slow-breeding, and barely spacefaring. Varnak nodded calmly. And yet, they survived a Class 15 death world for hundreds of thousands of years. Without armor, without claws, without genetic engineering. Do you understand what that means? Delegate hesitated. Varnak pressed another button. Images appeared of Earth, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, blizzards, deserts, jungle predators, disease outbreaks, and perhaps most damning images of human wars. In their history, Varnak said, they fought themselves more fiercely than any alien species could ever match. They created weapons capable of destroying worlds and yet survived. He pointed to a slide titled Evolutionary Pressure Timeline. Homo sapiens. For most species, evolution is reactive. A change in the environment leads to adaptation over thousands of years. Humans, they evolved under multiple pressure zones at once: climate instability, predation, starvation, plague, and their own aggression.
Ow.
Their biology is not designed for perfection. It's designed for survival through chaos. Eliza's voice as the murmurs turned to worried conversation. Dr. Eliza Grant stood and addressed the chamber. You all seem shocked, she said, but this isn't new for us. On Earth, we grew up learning to expect pain. We train in discomfort. We even simulate war as sport. Why? Because we know the universe isn't safe. She paced the edge of the circle. You think we're dangerous now? Because we fought through your simulation? But that wasn't a test for us, it was a memory. Her voice grew colder. You sent one of our soldiers into a hologram of a disaster. We live that for real. The Threx representative logic-driven species asked, why haven't you conquered more space then? If your biology is so superior? Eliza smiled faintly. Because we aren't driven by domination. We're driven by curiosity and caution. She looked up at the glowing maps around her. But make no mistake, if provoked, humans don't react with diplomacy. We react with adaptation, with escalation, with learning your weaknesses. becoming your nightmare. Behind the scenes after, the summit ended. Quiet panic spread across certain sectors. Military advisors from various species began reevaluating their protocols. Could humans adapt to alien weapons? Could they survive toxins, radiation, or high-gravity environments? The answer based on updated projections was yes. Given enough time, humans would not only survive, they would thrive. One report from the Varnari defense think tank read, "Humans should not be engaged in prolonged combat. They will adapt to any weapon, tactic, or environment given enough exposure. Their weakness is temporary, their strength is cumulative." Even more surprising was how quickly other researchers began asking questions not about how to stop humans, but how to learn from them. What if humanity's regenerative traits could be replicated? Could humans hold the key to universal disease resistance? Could their brain adaptability lead to breakthroughs in cognitive evolution? Suddenly, humans weren't a subject of study. They were a source of inspiration. Varnok Private. Dr. Varnok sat in his lab watching the simulation footage one more time, but he wasn't laughing anymore. He now viewed humanity as something new. It's not the weakest species in the council, but possibly the most terrifying, not because of brute strength, not because of advanced tech, but because of their quiet, unstoppable truth. They change. No matter what the galaxy throws at them, humans do not surrender, or break, or bow. They learn. They suffer and improve. They philanderize sharper. Adaptation, Varnok whispered, is their weapon. He submitted his final report that night. It ended with a simple line. We did not find the limit of human biology. We found that it has no limit. Part 5. Rewriting the scales 1100 words. The Galactic Council had never moved this fast before. In the past, it could take years for them to debate minor changes, reclassifying a trade route, approving a research station, or altering species rankings. But after the human simulation data and biological scans, it took them only 3 days to rewrite the official registry entry for Homo sapiens. What was once a dull, ignored entry in the Galactic Biology database now blazed with red. Alerts and warning labels. Species, Human Homo sapiens classification, Class 12 Adaptive Combatant Notes. Do not engage in prolonged conflict, capable of reactive evolution. Traits include stress-triggered muscle growth, neuroplastic combat learning, rapid immune, adaptation, and fear resilience. Threat level. Extreme under sustained environmental pressure. For the first time in recorded history, species had been promoted from a low-threat curiosity to a high-alert adaptive survivalist, not because of weapons or ships, but because of biology alone. Waves across the starswards spread across the waithwards. Galaxy like a storm. Diplomats sent urgent messages back to their homeworlds. Military strategists reevaluated their war doctrines. Intelligence networks began collecting human history files that had previously been considered irrelevant to its wars. Disasters, medical journals, even ancient sports records. Suddenly, humanity wasn't just another race in the stars. They were the race that wouldn't stop changing. The Threx ambassador, normally composed and emotionless, was heard muttering to her assistant, "If we had known what they truly were, we never would have allowed them into space." On the trade planet of Grelix Prime, shopkeepers began clearing out old Terran goods and replacing them with survival manuals, Earth stimulants, and even bootleg copies of human combat training holograms. Everyone wanted to understand the species that had defied scientific expectations. 1. Lurakesh. General summarized the feeling best in a message intercepted by a Urethi analyst. They don't need enhancements. They are the enhancement. You wound them, and they grow teeth. You push them, and they grow claws. You bury them, and they dig upward. New alliances, new fears. At the heart of the storm stood Dr. Eliza Grant, Earth's representative on station, Aelin Prime. She had arrived with a smile and a scanner. Now she was the name whispered in council chambers and printed on alien science journals. Elisa was no warrior, but her calm, clear explanations had struck a chord across species lines. She didn't argue for superiority. She never bragged. She simply laid out the truth of human biology and let the galaxy come to its own terrifying conclusion. A Cathari researcher asked her during a council interview, "Why do humans adapt this way? Why not evolve for strength or speed instead?" Eliza thought for a moment, then answered, "Because we never knew what tomorrow would bring. So evolution didn't pick a direction, it gave us the ability to pick one ourselves." That answer was recorded and rebroadcast across 17 star systems. It wasn't a boast. It was a warning and a promise. Behind the scenes, research frenzy Dar. Varnock, now one of humanity's strongest advocates, oversaw the beginning of the Human Integration Study Initiative. It's no longer studying humans as an inferior species. The program now sought to learn from them. Medical researchers studied human immune responses, hoping to develop adaptive vaccines for galactic plagues. Neurologists examined human brain scans for ways to enhance learning in other species. Geneticists looked at muscle regeneration, telomeric repair, and cellular damage responses, but nothing amazed them more than human behavior under stress. Even when panic signals were high, heart rates peaked, and cortisol flooded the bloodstream, humans didn't freeze. They didn't shut down. They made decisions. Clear, strategic, fast decisions. Varnock's final study on the subject summed it up in one sentence: where other species stop functioning under fear, humans become who they were meant to be. Humanity's reaction back on Earth, the news began. To reach civilian populations, first came the diplomatic messages. Invitations from species that had once ignored or dismissed them. Then came the trade deals, the scientific inquiries, and the flood of new interest in human physiology and technology, the United Earth. Government held a press conference where one general said proudly, "We told them we were ready. Now they finally believe us." But for most humans, the reaction was less about pride and more about realization. For generations, Earth had considered itself barely above survival, always catching up to the rest of the galaxy. Always behind now, they knew the truth. They were never behind, they were just different. And that difference was their strength. A message etched in stone a few weeks after the Council's reclassification. Station Aelin Prime unveiled a new monument in the Grand Hall of Species. It stood at the end of the gallery, beside the statues of ancient star travelers and fallen civilizations. The statue was not of a warrior or scientist. It was of Corporal James Weller mid-stride, holding a jagged piece of metal armor in one hand and a torn-up drone part in the other. His face was bruised, but his eyes were locked forward. The base of the statue carried a single engraved line: "Strength is not what they were born with. Strength is what they become." Visitors came from every corner of the galaxy to see it. Some feared what it meant. Others were inspired. A few wept. The final word in. A quiet moment on the observation deck. Dr. Varnock and Dr. Elisa Grant stood together, watching the stars. "Do you know," Varnock said softly, "in the early years of the Erethi, we were hunted by predators. We learned to hide, to adapt. That was our strength." Elisa nodded. "Same with us, except on Earth. The predators never went away. They just changed forms." He turned to her. "I once laughed at your kind. I remember," she said, smiling. "I no longer laugh." Eliza looked out at the stars. "Neither does the galaxy." A long silence passed. Then Varnock said, "You know what frightens me most?" "What? This isn't your final form, is it?" Eliza turned, her eyes calm and sure. "No, it never is." Epilogue. The galaxy watches across star systems, across species lines, and across political divides. A quiet understanding began to settle. Humanity would not be shaped by the stars. They would shape the stars. Themselves, they were not perfect. They were not invincible. But they were change made flesh. And the galaxy finally understood what it had let in. Not just another species. Not just another member of the Council. But a force of nature with one rule above all others: adapt or be left behind